Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we're going to do a watercolor pencil, and watercolor crayon painting, and I'm going to begin by sketching on my drawing with some Albright Druer watercolor pencils. I am using a photograph from Lillian Bell over at paintmyphoto.ning.com. I recommend any painters to join that site. There's so many beautiful reference photos that photographers allow painters to paint. It's really awesome and fun. I want to let you know that the bottom of that colander is really going to give me trouble during the whole painting, but you'll be able to see how I rework a drawing and kind of roll with it while I'm working. And I'm putting in just some basic circles for my tomatoes. Now I am using a blue watercolor pencil to draw in the drapes in the background, and there's also a little napkin on the table that I'm going to be sketching in here in a minute. I'm using a red watercolor pencil to give a base color, kind of block in some colors on the tomatoes. I'm just throwing it in there. I recently purchased a set of Albright Druer watercolor pencils from Faber-Castell. They are gorgeous pencils. I haven't had a chance to really use them too much. I thought I might do the whole thing in the watercolor pencils, but shortly thereafter decided I really wanted to use some of my paint and some of my watercolor crayons. I am definitely most comfortable when I've got big, juicy puddles of paint to work with. Now you can see where I'm trying to mess with the bottom of that colander some more. It's still not where I need it to be, but it's getting there, and I'm not letting it really, I kind of move on. When something's not working, I'll move on to a different area of the picture and then come back and see if I can get it back to rights, so to speak. And I'm adding in some of the other colors that I see from the photograph. I'll put a link below to that photograph so you can go see it for yourself. I'm adding some of this kind of ochre yellow in there to warm up the tomatoes and put some nice reflections in the silver colander, which is kind of like a warm silver. And I'm in again with some more red watercolor pencils. Now at this point, I'm kind of thinking to myself, I really wish I just switched over to paints before here, because I could have gotten so much more in by now. But I think probably seeing the sketching out with a pencil may be more beneficial for you guys at home, because you can really kind of see how I'm laying in shadows. That gray I'm using is the shadows on the napkins, and I'm just filling in some more of the velvet. There's like a blue velvet backdrop, and that's what I'm doing there with that pencil. And this whole painting took me a little over an hour to do, just to give you a little bit of information there, so you're not trying to keep up with me. Obviously it's sped up, and I just wanted to kind of give you that information as well. I do tend to draw fast anyway, so then sped up it's just a little bit crazier. I've got my bucket of water, and look at that. There's this funny little fly that keeps flying around and landing on my painting. I don't know if he thinks there's real tomatoes there or what. I wouldn't think so yet, but you never know. That's what I get for leaving the door to the studio open on nice days. I'm just liquefying my color. As you can see, these colors really don't look much like what the finished painting did, if you remember that from the beginning of the video, the little still shot there. But I'm getting in those basic colors. I'm getting to know a new supply, which is those Albright Druer pencils, and I'm just having fun with it. I just turned on the camera and I started painting. I didn't attempt to talk. My husband actually had the day off, so he's puttering around in his wood shop. There's lots of activity around in the house, so I'm just kind of chilling out, sitting at my table and painting. I like the color quality of these pencils. I think I can appreciate it more looking at it, watching it now, than I did when I was actually using it. They are very rich and saturated. I'm going to have a good time playing with those, I think. So those are the Albright Druer pencils. They are expensive, and I bought them with my very own money. They weren't a freebie by the company or anything, but I've wanted them for quite a while, so I finally splurged when I saw a good sale over at Cheap Joe's. All right, so I'm just liquefying those shadows. There on the wet paper, I'm using the watercolor pencil to draw the spots in the colander, and there's that little fly back again. Jeez, go away, guy. So I'm just putting those in now, because a dry watercolor pencil on wet paper is going to give me a lot of control and really dark lines that aren't going to really wash away as I do more watercoloring and more layers on top. And so I was kind of using an effect that watercolor pencils have that's usually undesirable. I'm using it to my advantage there. So keep that in mind whenever you want to have some really dark lines. You want to put them down at the beginning of your painting session, and you want them to remain there. Now I've switched over to my watercolor palette. I've got some ultramarine blue, and I'm going to be mixing some burnt sienna with it to make it nice, that nice neutral gray. And I'm filling in the areas that do not have the blue backdrop. just over there on the side, and I'm adding some of that to my shadows in the blue since I do have blue as one of the colors, and trying to minimize the bottom of the colander that is still continuing to give me a hard time during this painting. And this is probably one of my favorite steps of the painting, is to just lay down juicy washes of color. You can add some more of that gray, that darker gray mix in with the brighter blue. I'm going over what I had with the watercolor pencils. I felt like I just needed to saturate that color more and make it a little bit crisper. You could see, if you look at where the gray that I mixed is meeting up to the blue, you can see that when you have damp paper and you're going up next to it, you get this really rough, ragged edge. Don't worry, I'll be able to fix that later, but just keep that in mind. That's because my paper was damp and I went up to it with wet paint, so it's giving me a really rough edge there. So then I decided to kind of dry everything with my heat gun, or at least the area I was working in, so I'd be able to build up some more color without it just running all over the place on me. But you're going to see here that when you're doing mixed media, when you're adding watercolor crayons and watercolor pencils and watercolor, you can really fix most anything. So please don't feel like you're stuck or your painting's ruined because you've gotten to a point where you're not happy with how it's turning out. At that point, it's almost my favorite point, because it's like, well, what am I going to do to it now that's worse? I can paint with freedom, because I'm not going to make it any worse. Adding some more washes into the colander to get the reflections. I'm adding colors that I've used throughout the painting so that it authentically looks like it's a reflected silver container. I have to apologize. I had a sore throat. Well, we got the kids a karaoke machine for their birthday, and I think I went a little overboard the other night using it. So either my voice is raspy from all the ABBA I was singing, or I'm coming down with a cold. I really hope I'm not coming down with a cold, but that's why it's raspy. And there, I'm intensifying the colors with some of my watercolor. I like the M. Graham brand of watercolors. I've been using them for about 15 years. They're super saturated, and I'm not sure anymore, but they used to be a lot more affordable than like Winsor Newton and some of the other brands. So just to give you that info, there's so many good brands out there though now. If it's an artist quality watercolor, it's probably pretty good. So don't worry if you're using different paints than I am. It's just important that you paint. Not really as important what you paint with. Now I'm lifting off some highlights. I'm just kind of going over that with a scrubber brush, which is a stiffer type of brush, and I'm just kind of wetting it and scrubbing out areas and blotting it off. Never rub your paper when you're lifting color off. Always blot. So straight up and down with a dry paper towel, and that's going to work really well for you. Now I've switched to a skinnier oil painting brush, and I am lifting out some of the highlight right at the ridge, and I can also kind of round out any areas of the colander that have become flat because of my, devil may care approach to watercolor painting, and I kind of, obliterate my lines, and then I'm adding some highlights to the bottom of the colander, which is starting to kind of look normal and not so weird anymore. Hopefully it gets better. We'll see. I think it does. Hopefully that's not as good as it. Sometimes, you do something and then you completely undo it when you're done and it goes terribly wrong, but I think it turned out okay. So again, with the red watercolor paint, that is cadmium red medium. So it's kind of like a tomatoey orange color already. I'm adding in my most intense reds, and I'm leaving spots where I'll put some yellow ochre later. There's that yellow ochre right now. La-di-da. There it is. Put that right in there. And this is kind of the medium layer of the painting. We're going to be going over everything with watercolor crayons. Well, not everything, but but quite a bit of it. It's just fun. I really enjoy using watercolor crayons, but I also really enjoy using the regular watercolors because you can cover so much ground so quickly. And there I'm working on the reflections inside the colander, just kind of splashing down some of the shapes that are reflected. So I've got the shapes of the tomatoes mirrored at the top of the colander because it's concave in there, so it's going to kind of give you an upside down look, an upside down, image of the tomatoes, so you kind of see it up there on the top instead of right next to the tomatoes, if that makes sense. I hope it does. I hope my voice is not too scratchy and annoying. Although someone left a very rude comment on my channel and said I should shut up. So, mean person, I don't approve of that. I think that's very mean, and you shouldn't have posted that on my channel. Although probably a lot of you are saying, she's got a point there. And I'm just adding some of that yellow ochre into the colander as well to warm it up. And I'm adding some of that color on the napkin there to warm up the sunlit areas or the the light spots on the wrinkles in the napkin. Got another nice dark mix there, the ultramarine with a little bit of burnt sienna, and I am just refining the edge. Remember that edge that got really rough when we had wet onto damp paper, and it got really really jagged and ruffly? So there I was just fixing that up. And I'm also deepening my colors and refining my edges so I get that rich, intense color that I saw in the photograph. Again, I will put a link below to that photograph underneath in the video description, and also on my blog, so you can go over there and check it out. Beautiful photograph by Lillian Bell, and she has so many gorgeous still life photos. It's almost like you look at it and you have to like click on it and look at it big and make sure it's not a painting because it's so perfect. It's amazing. And I'm just adding some more wrinkles, some more depth of color into the wrinkles in the background on that velvet fabric. Again, with the ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. Sometimes I'll drag a little of that red over there because that red is really close to orange and it will give me a nice dark. I'm going right in on the wet paper with that Albright Drewer pencil. I am drawing on the little stems on the tomato, those little, those little leafy stemmy things. Just drawing them right on there with the pencil so that it will kind of grab on and permanently mark my paper. And I'm deepening the shadows because those tomatoes are weighty, heavy, solid objects. I want to make sure they have that shadow on the napkin underneath. Now the fun begins. I love using watercolor crayons, and it's so much fun to go over an underpainting done in watercolor. So here I'm using a medium yellow, and I'm going in and adding all the kind of like under the highlights area of the tomato. It's really going to make them nice and bright and juicy looking. And I've got some tomatoes on my windowsill right now. My sister has a green thumb, and my windowsill is covered with tomatoes. I've got gourds and squashes and pumpkins from her. They're going to show up in a painting tutorial, I think. So now I'm just liquefying some of that watercolor crayon just with a small flat synthetic brush. When I'm using watercolor crayons, I like to use what are called brights. And they're a flat brush, but they generally have a little bit shorter of bristles, so they're a little firmer, and they really help push the pigment around. And you don't want your brush too wet, otherwise you'll just wash it away. So you just need, I kind of like to dip it in the water and then squeeze the bristles to get all the extra water out, and that's perfect for blending watercolor crayon. So I'm just layering different shades of orange, red, and reddish brown to build up a nice solid tomato there. And then just gently blend them with your damp short flat brush. It's really fun. It's very relaxing. Watercolor crayons are so much fun to use. And Caran d'Ache are my favorite, but they're also very expensive. I've had my set for about 15 years, and they're a lot more now than they were then. But I did find that Lyra, Lyra is the brand, and I picked up a smaller set from Blick a couple months ago, maybe a month ago, because I wanted to see if they would be comparable to the Caran d'Ache, and they're very nice. They're really soft and buttery, and maybe not quite as opaque and as firm as Caran d'Ache, but I think you'd be very happy with them. They're half the price or less than Caran d'Ache, and the sticks are a little bit bigger. So I would recommend trying those out if you're on the fence. If you try those out and you don't like them at all, then don't buy the Caran d'Ache because you're not going to like them either. But if you try them and you use them a lot and you say, geez, I really kind of like this, then you may invest in the Caran d'Ache. You may want to just buy a few sticks, open stock to build up your collection. But it's a great way to get started without spending really big bucks, because it's, if your funds are limited and you're trying to decide between supplies, you want to make sure you're not going to make a costly mistake. I'm just taking white here and adding some highlights all over the painting, all over anywhere I see see a bright spot. So these highlights on the tomatoes are going to be your soft highlight, not your really, really bright one. We'll save the really, really bright highlights for towards the end of the painting. You can see when I wet my brush and I lift pigment right off the watercolor crayon, it's very opaque. It's almost like I'm painting with gouache. It almost has a look, and it feels like when you're painting with it, it reminds me of painting with oils, because you really can sculpt the watercolor crayon around. It's quite thick and manipulative. I don't know exactly the right word. When I say manipulative, it sounds negative, but this is a very positive thing. When you're manipulating that color around, you're just kind of pushing it and shoving it and making it behave, and you're dominating the color. It just sounds negative no matter how I say it. I'm sorry, but it's fun to do with your watercolor crayons. I'm adding some indigo watercolor crayons to deepen the shadows in that velvet fabric. You can go kind of wild and woolly with it. It's going to dissolve really easily. The paper I'm using is Arches. Oh, and turn your paper around so that you can reach in everything and you can be comfortable. I work flat on a table when I'm shooting a video, but if I have my druthers, I actually would prop up the edge of the top of my picture on a couple of books so that I had a little bit of a slant. Not so much of a slant that my paint is sliding and pooling all over my paper, but enough that I could kind of see it without any distortion. So I do sometimes have that problem when I'm working flat, that I kind of look across to skew at my picture, and it will distort a little bit for me. But I can always look up at my monitor if I'm recording and see if I'm getting some perspective issues. But that's just a little tip for you. Put a couple books underneath the top of your painting so you can have it tilted towards you a little bit. You can see how creamy those watercolor crayons are as I build up the fabric, because you're getting a nice depth of color. I can make long, broad strokes. The colors aren't running all over the place. They're very smooth. It's just a really fun medium to work in. And, they do have kids' versions of watercolor crayons. They don't perform quite the same, but those Lyra crayons I mentioned earlier are very high quality, almost as good as a Caran d'Ache, and they are very creamy like that. Water-soluble oil pastels would also be a great bet to do this project with. The Portfolio water-soluble oil pastels, you can get a set of 24 for about $10 at Blick or Amazon or Cheap Joe's, any of those places. Sometimes Staples used to have them, Walmart might have them, but they would give you a lot of the same results. So you could totally try this project with those. And I'm working upside down again, apparently, just because I can get the chisel edge of that brush right up against that colander and fix it. Now I'm softening the bottom of the colander because it looks a little too stark to me. And now I like that much better, because it's kind of, you get the lost and found edges from the lighting from the photograph that I'm working from. And I think because we have a silver colander here, you can really have fun, spend some time in the reflections and the shadows that you see. Really look for the highlights and other objects in your scene being reflected. It's a lot of fun. I really recommend you try painting metal and glass sometime. All right, so I just held it up so I could kind of see it, because as I mentioned, it's hard to tell when it's flat on the table. Now I'm taking some white watercolor crayon and just adding high highlights to the fabric, which I'll blend in a little bit. You can also add some to the napkin if you feel like you just need a little bit more richness of color. It just makes, the watercolor crayons make whatever you're coloring feel a little more substantial, so it makes your tomatoes feel a little heavier and more opaque. And I think that's when I'm looking at a piece that I want to paint and I'm trying to decide the medium, I kind of look and try to figure what is the feeling of the piece and how will I best represent the attitude of the objects that I'm painting or the scene that I'm painting. I'm adding a little bit more detail into the handle there. It had a little bit of a dip or a little point in the middle, and I wanted to get that in. Back in with the oil painting brush to kind of push some of the pigment around some of the edges of the colander where I've lost it. Now back to the softer brush, and I'm just blending anywhere I need to blend. If the brush is damp, I can really get a nice blend in there. How many times should I say blend? I've said it a lot. And that's just some kind of a soft pastel yellow, and now some nice bright orange, building up colors some more. It's fun to do. I probably could have stopped earlier, but it's fun, so why not? What the heck? Keep blending. Keep on blending, if that's what you want to do. The haters keep hating, the blenders keep blending. Blending, I don't know. That was just an awful analogy. I don't know. There are a little more reflections in there. And adding, blending out my shadows in the napkin. There I'm putting some indigo watercolor. Actually, you know what? That's charcoal gray. That is charcoal gray, not indigo. Sorry. That's a really nice color. It's not quite black, so you don't get that black hole look in your picture, but it does give you a nice matte, dark shadow. So that's kind of a nice color. That's, again, the Caran d'Ache watercolor crayons. And I can drag some of that shadow over the blue. See how I'm doing that? So it doesn't seem like that background is not part of the picture. So I'm kind of cross-pollinating my colors there. And I did that right over there on the other side, so it wouldn't feel like I had this huge weighty dark area on one side and not on the other. It's very important to be mindful of balance in your painting. So if you have something dark on one side, you might need to put something that is heavy on the other side. Somehow balance out the picture so when people look at it, they're not feeling awkward or uncomfortable. Then again, if you're painting something where you want to have like some sort of political message or something you have some deep meaning to impart, then you can use those sort of tricks to make things feel off-centered, off-balance, make them feel a little bit uncomfortable. So those are just some tricks you can use to your advantage now that you know what, makes them look like that. You know that you got to know the rules so you can break them, I guess as the old saying goes. And I'm adding some of that light yellow around. Just again, if you get too much on there or if the paint's too wet, just blot straight up and down with a paper towel. I have used like old t-shirts and rags that I've cut up as painting rags, but for some reason a paper towel does really well. It does better than like cloth rags for you lifting up on your watercolor paper. And there I'm just kind of like holding it so I could see it properly. Okay, we're getting pretty close to where we're going to want some high highlights. So I'm adding a medium highlight. I'm adding the creamy pastel yellow onto the stems of the tomatoes. Just doing a little blending to soften things in. So that's not my super duper high highlight. Now I'm going in with the whites, which are my super high highlights. These are like the cherry on top. So you use this sparingly anywhere you want to add a little sparkle to your picture. And it just really makes it look polished and finished. And I really hope I did Lillian Bell's photograph justice with this because it was such a pretty photo. Sometimes it's kind of hard when you know the photographer is going to see your painting. You're kind of like, oh, I hope that they feel like it was worth sharing their photo after they see what I did with it. But I'm happy with it. I think it was so much fun to paint, and that's the most important thing regardless of how it turns out. I really hope that you enjoyed this tutorial and it inspires you to paint something for yourself today. If you want to see more painting videos, please click on that button there, and don't forget to click on the other button and subscribe too, and we will make sure we keep you inspired as best as we can. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, happy crafting!